and they had already canceled my key fob. I couldn't get in. I mean, this is like a couple of weeks. Get in the door. I went around to the back, and I go in, and I go in the training room, and everybody was like petrified. They were scared, like that they would be seen with me.
Oh my God!
And one of the trainers said, "Coach, if you'll come back like after everybody," I said, "You ain't got to worry about me ever coming back." And it was like, I just had the impression they were told.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to WreckTalk. And I think I can speak for all of us, especially Georgia Tech fans, when I say this is the interview we were all waiting on. Shout out to, in the Discord, why does it hide people's names? Joey D. Posted this. I wasn't even aware of it. Paul Johnson on the Bill Shanks show. I think this aired on 93.1 radio station here in Georgia. Paul Johnson it's not really a tell-all, but definitely doesn't hold back his stronger opinions about what happened with Georgia Tech after he left, specifically his opinions on Paul Johnson, which I think we all knew. Like this, none of this comes to a surprise to us Tech fans. Paul Johnson and Geoff Collins don't like each other at all. We definitely knew Geoff didn't care for Paul. His actions said as much, and definitely the other way around. Now, Paul isn't innocent in all of this, meaning like he's not without his faults either. We're going to see, he makes a comment about Brent Key that really surprised me and honestly disappointed me with Paul. Kind of a slight comment he made about Brent, but he definitely doesn't hold it back about Geoff Collins, administrations at Tech, how things were done while he was at Tech, how he was treated after he left Georgia Tech, which is actually pretty shocking to me. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was as bad as it was. So with that being said, let's just dive into it. I've got about 15 minutes of clips here. The whole interview is about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something in that ballpark. Let's dive in.
And all that, it's just
Let's back up. First, he's going to talk about transfers, which was surprising to me. And look, I've aired this opinion on the show before. Tech administration, the elitism that runs through and how it affects football is freaking frustrating and handicapping to our athletic department. All right. What do I mean? Well, let's hear what Paul has to say about it.
Boy, it's changed since you left, hasn't
It's changed a great deal. My timing was kind of impeccable. I got out right before COVID. And nobody saw that coming. And now with the transfer portal and the NIL and all that, it's just a completely different game. And the schools have had to change. We were talking earlier. I was telling somebody when I was at Georgia Tech, we weren't allowed to take transfers. And I think.
Can you believe that? Weren't allowed to take transfers. Now, I know the landscape was completely different, but what's the reason for just blanket saying we don't take transfers? I mean, it's just, to me, it comes off as elitist. We're Georgia Tech and we have this special thing. We don't want people transferring in. Part of that could be to do with how stringent their transfer process is. I'm sure it's not the same for athletes. I can say I transferred into Georgia Tech as a student. You had to have a minimum 3.5 GPA for your math and science. So art appreciation didn't count. All those, GPA fluffing classes didn't count. And you had to have linear algebra. That could be the same for these athletes too. And let me tell you, linear algebra, don't let the name fool you. It is a very abstract, difficult type of math, like how you build different coordinate systems and define those systems with vectors. Anyways, you don't want to hear that. Let's get back into it.
I think in my 11 years there, I could count on one hand. We got two or three, but I mean, I would have to go up. I remember we took a young man from Stanford that had graduated from Stanford with a 3.2, and they wouldn't let him in. I mean, I had to go all the way to the president to get him in, and he goes, one time, he said, we'll let, and
Wow.
Can you believe that? So a guy that has a 3.2 at Stanford, not good enough for Georgia Tech. What are you doing, Georgia Tech administration? Why? And I'm pretty sure that guy was a fullback. His name was like Scone or something. He ended up never really doing much at Tech, but that's beside the point. Like this, just no, we're not doing this because we're Georgia Tech, needs to go. And unfortunately, I don't think it will. I'm glad Paul brought it up. Now he's going to talk about the transition from the triple option. And I will say, even at the time, before we knew just how bad Collins was, I didn't like it. He definitely took shots at Paul Johnson. His offense wanted to completely, really wipe Paul Johnson from the history books of Georgia Tech, which was completely insane. Let's hear what Paul has to say about it.
There were problems for Georgia Tech of keeping it the same level of what you had it at for 11 years. Regardless of the details of how that happened, did you expect when you left, Coach, because of the potential of them changing the offense, if that was the direction they were going to go, that they would have a period that it would be tough for them?
not really. I mean,
That's nonsense. And this is why I said Paul isn't really innocent 100% in all of this either. That his response to, do you think there's any troubles transitioning out of the triple option? Not really. It's hard to take someone seriously that says that. And look, I love Paul Johnson. He's one of the greatest coaches to ever do it on the flats. But his defensiveness about his system and just thinking, when you have 18 running backs and 6 wide receivers on a team and you want to go to a more traditional style of offense, that there's no difficulty in doing that is insane. That is an insane thing to say. We give offensive coordinators the benefit of the doubt in year one when they're not making such a dramatic transition.
I think the change in the offense things gets blown way out of proportion. I mean, we've had to go in and change the offense everywhere I've ever coached.
That's also dishonest. Like, it's way easier to transition into a triple option than out of it. I feel like that's probably self-evident.
When I went into Georgia Tech, certainly we had to change. When I went to the University of Hawaii, we changed. We changed when I went back to Navy. They had gotten away from what we were doing.
Wow.
Georgia Southern had kind of gotten it. They had drifted away after I'd left to different things, but maybe not so drastic. But, I could tell you my personal opinion about what happened at Georgia Tech, but I won't get into that.
So, I won't beat a dead horse with that. I just don't think he's being reasonable with that. Now, Jeff's response to it, was that all equally as unreasonable? Yes. Now, this is probably the most interesting bit. He goes into coaches laughing. It was really a circus show. And even into Geoff, he's kind of touted as this player's coach, but he's kind of two-faced. Let's listen to it.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you surprised that Geoff Collins, and I know I'm not asking you to be specific about that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please do ask my opinion of Geoff, young Jeffrey.
That he seemed to want to have the exact opposite of not everything, but a lot of what you did. Was that a surprise to you?
Well, he wanted to reinvent history a little bit. And I kept thinking about he was going back to when Georgia Tech was relevant and when they were this, that, and the other. And I was trying to think back when they were better than when we were there. I guess maybe in the 50s. But if you went back and looked, I kept looking for all the championships they had won and it's like, he just distorted everything when he got there. I mean, I'll just call a spade a spade. I don't care. I got no respect for the guy, so I can say what I want.
I've got no respect for the guy. Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree about this reinventing history. I mean, he acts like he wanted to act like Coach Paul Johnson wasn't one of the greatest coaches we've had at Georgia Tech. The only reason there's not an asterisk, but there's a little weirdness with it is because the style of offense. That's neither here nor there. And I'll tell you what I think that is. It's insecurity on Geoff Collins' part. He did not want what happened to happen, which is that he just flat out failed, and he never could rise to the level of the success we had with Paul Johnson. He's going to talk about it a little later of just how bad that Collins' disdain for it was. But yeah, you can't just act like we've got to get back to this great level of success when we really were already at that. Now, I know at the end of Paul Johnson's tenure, things were kind of starting to decline a little bit. But also, we did win a national title in 1990. He said going back all the way to the 50s. It's slightly disrespectful to George O'Leary and Ralph Regan and all of those guys. But I get his point.
He went in and distorted everything that was there and acted like we'd never won a game.
I know.
Absolutely.
And lied about who he inherited, lied about the offensive line, lied about us not going to the high schools in Georgia. He just told a bunch of whoppers, and it came back to get him. Because there wasn't much substance there.
Well, that was the thing that I
think we'll all agree, as far as Geoff Collins is concerned, there's not much substance there is an perfect title to the book of Geoff Collins.
I think people that around the state were like, well, what is he trying to do here? You kind of went from a hard-nosed football coach who had success to P.T. Barnum. Right.
Well, what was really
which, if you don't know, is the circus guy.
Amazing, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. I've never been one to hold much back. No. But the opposing coaches in the league would call me, and they were laughing. And I had one particular coach who called me after they had really pounded him at home there in Atlanta, and he told me, he said, "Paul, it's a circus." And he goes, I told my kids after the game in the locker room, he said, "Congratulations." He said, "You just beat a team that physically had kicked our ass for the last 3 years." And he goes, "I'm not just saying that to you." He said, "When we got through with those games," he said, "it was hard for us to play the next week because of the physicality and the way you played." And
that's one thing you can never say about a Geoff Collins coach team, is that they weren't physical and ready to play, which was absolutely the opposite of a Geoff Collins coach team. Weren't prepared, were not physical at all. And I 100% believe Paul Johnson here that he talked to other coaches and they were laughing at him and they looked at it as a circus show, because it was objectively a circus show. The push-ups on the sidelines, the lifting weights on the sidelines, the pool noodles at practice, chasing each other with cardboard cutouts and whatnot. And I'll even tell you this, I've mentioned it before, how insecure Geoff Collins was about Paul Johnson. When they went and played Florida State that year, we beat them with Jeff Sims. The hotel, just being nice and trying to be, provide excellent service to the team, had a framed picture in the elevator of the blocked field goal returned in Atlanta, one of the greatest endings to any football game, not just Georgia Tech, of any football game. And one of the staffers for Tech was like, "Oh, no, you have to take that down. Jeff wouldn't like that." That's insecure, petty, absolute BS nonsense. So I said that to say I understand the disdain coming from this end too.
I had another coach who called me late on a Saturday night after they had beaten them, And he was laughing. He said, I even lined up your formation at the end just to stick it in. And I was like, so, I think the people who knew.
Yeah. I don't know what team he's talking about, but that's hilarious. Now, going further into, he kind of talks about this is something that, because Collins, I think, in a way is so self-centered and just lives inside of his own head and can't see the big picture or anything out of that. When you basically trash the previous coach and his entire, philosophy of football, you're really disrespecting the current players on the roster. Like, God, y'all are playing in that stupid nonsense. Like, I can't believe y'all put up with that. And it's not a good look for Geoff. It's one of the many reasons I dislike him. Let's hear what Paul has to say about it.
But and not only did it frustrate, I guess I got frustrated with it. He frustrated a lot of the former players who played there.
Yeah.
I mean, there were kids who had played and won double-digit games and played in Orange Bowls and played in ACC championship games, and just totally disrespected what they had done and the tradition and the history. And, I told somebody the team that he inherited had won 7 games, had finished second in the Coastal. When I left, had 4 of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. Now, I could go into the story that one of them's dad told me who left, and those kind of things. But, to say those kids averaged 250 pounds and, I mean, it just –
That was a little much.
Well, and it was a backhanded at them.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that. We were undersized on the offensive line under that system, but it is completely backhanded toward the guys. Yeah, we were going to ACC title games. We were winning on some years 10 games a year, and you're completely trashing all that. What is that about? That's Geoff's immaturity. So, I think when people hear me talk about Geoff, they think it's sour grapes. And cards on the table, some of it is, right, because I love Georgia Tech. Most of it isn't, though, when you just objectively look how the guy ran things.
Yeah.
And I don't know why you would do that. I mean, I followed a lot of coaches, and I think anybody who's been in the profession knows that when you go in, if you don't have anything good to say, just don't say anything.
Right.
100%. 100%. And that was the first red flag I saw with Geoff, is how vocal he was about that. And it's like, why? There's no advantage to doing this.
But, when I went into Georgia Tech, I was very appreciative of what Chan had done. I mean, we had some really good players in the program. Now, we had holes like you do at everything. There were certain positions where we needed more guys or whatever. But, it wouldn't have done me any good to go in and bash Coach Gailey.
No.
Plus,
Agreed.
I had a lot of respect for him. I thought he did a good job. So it was like
I will say this. You cannot compare, and you will never hear Coach Johnson say this. There's one thing you'll never hear him say, is that I'm wrong or I made a mistake. I guarantee you'll never hear Paul Johnson say that. But whatever. You cannot compare what Paul Johnson inherited to what Geoff Collins inherited. They're not even in the same universe. Do not forget, he should be thanking Chan Gailey, by the way, and it's an interesting thought experiment to think what would have happened had we not fired Chan Gailey. He had a top 10 class that came in. All the players that he came in and ran the table with, Josh Nesbitt, Roddy Jones, Jonathan Dwyer, all those studs were Gailey recruits. So you cannot compare that to what Geoff, and I guess dang you, Paul, for making me somewhat have to defend Geoff here, but I want to be fair. It's not even in the same universe what they inherited.
I'd never done that. I mean, I inherited a program at Navy that had gone 3-30 the 3 years before I got there.
You don't want to talk about what you inherited at
And
Tech.
I didn't go in and bash the coaches or the players who were there. I think the year before I went to Georgia Southern, they won 4 games before I went back as a head coach. So it's, I think you're probably just making a lot of excuses when you do that, and you're trying to.
It definitely comes off that way, and he wanted to lean into that. And you know what? The hell with Josh Pate for really pasting that narrative everywhere. Oh, you see this in politics all the time, and it doesn't even matter what side of the fence you're on. Whoever is in office wants to blame the previous administration for what was inherited. But at some point, I mean, you got to produce results. Geoff was never able to do that, and he wanted to demonize Paul Johnson for some reason. Paul's going to talk about his disappointment with Tech administration. He's also going to make kind of a slight at Brent that, as I said in the beginning of the video, really disappoints me in him, and I think is 100% unwarranted.
I was more disappointed with the administration for letting it go on.
Yeah. That was surprising too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a good relationship with Todd when I was there, and liked him, and I was just stunned that they would let it go on because they knew what he was saying wasn't true.
Right.
Now, I will say, I do think the administration should have pulled him aside. Like Todd should have pulled Geoff aside and said, "Cut that crap off. Stop with this bashing the previous style of offense and coach. I don't want to hear it again." I don't think that ever happened. I think, look, Geoff was great at selling himself. I think he's like, look, this is going to make Tech back into this whenever we were, just a premier program. But yeah, I agree with Paul here. They should have stepped in and been like, look, I don't want to hear you talking about the previous administration anymore. All right.
Coach Paul Johnson's our guest. And I think from our perspective here, I know Russ Brown, who used to be my co-host, who left last year to go to Nebraska, we would watch it, and Skipper, when he would join us, we would talk about it like, okay, let's give the guy a chance. You want to try to see, all right, he's coming in after someone who was successful. Let's see what he can do. And then after a while, it just kind of got to be a freak show. It was like we kept on asking, I think, on a regular basis, what the hell is he doing? And, then we heard the stuff about the push-ups on the sideline before the game and how people were laughing about that, how he would roll those sleeves up and do all that, and then the 404 stuff. And it was like
the Waffle House.
Like, you've got something to sell. You've got a great institution. You've got a program that's had success. Why are you trying to make it a trick show? And I think that was what – and then after a while it was like, all right, this is inevitable. Didn't you feel that, Skipper, that it was like this cannot end well? I've always said, Coach, there's like a point of no return for certain coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know at what point he talks about Brent. Maybe it's in this next one. But yeah, I mean, I knew definitely toward the end of the third year it wasn't going to work out. But check this out. This is insane to me. As successful as Paul Johnson was at Tech, and from what he's saying, he was basically banned and shunned from being on campus. People were really not allowed to talk to Paul after he left. Complete insanity.
And they had already canceled my key fob. I couldn't get in. I mean, this is like a couple of weeks. So I couldn't get.
So he's saying, I think he's trying to go to the gym, and this is like 2 or 3 weeks after, he had left the program. He's still living here. I'm sure he's still in the process of moving. And they're treating him like a guy that was fired for cause for like stuff that Petrino did. Weird.
Get in the door. I went around to the back, and I go in, and I go in the training room, and everybody was like petrified. They were scared, like that they would be seen with me.
Oh my God!
And one of the trainers said, "Coach, if you'll come back like after everybody, I said, you ain't got to worry about me ever coming back." And it was like I just had the impression they were told, or I don't know if they were told. I think they were just scared to be associated, because of the way he came in. And I knew a little bit about it because he was there a little bit when we were in bowl practice. And some of the guys who worked down in the recruiting office or whatever had already told me some stories about the way he would talk to players to their face, and then when they'd walk around the corner, trash them, and
Jeez.
so it was.
But now with Key there, you would feel more comfortable doing something like that or not?
He was very.
So that he was treated like an HR fire, for cause, for ethical reasons. I don't even know what to say about that. A coach that produced ACC titles for you, Orange Bowl victories, and the thing that the reason that they fired Gailey, wins over Georgia. He can't even get back into the locker room. He can't be seen with anybody. They act afraid to be around him. I'm sure Geoff will never watch this, but I'm also sure that was 100% driven by Geoff. You're a piece of garbage, man. You're a childish, insecure, small man for doing that.
Very nice when I was there. I mean, I didn't really know Brent. I'd been
talking about
around
Brent.
him in recruiting some, but he was very cordial, and he's called me a couple times and invited me down, and they've
That's
invited me
good.
to come talk to the team and this, that, and the other. So,
This is where he loses the plot for me, though.
no, I mean, I wouldn't feel about not going, although he was there while it was going on.
Yep. Well, that's
And he also made a couple of statements about we didn't come here to play small ball anymore, and this is easier to recruit to than Alabama. I think he's found that's probably not the case.
Yeah, I remember that comment. Well, it's ridiculous that you had any thought in your head to make you feel anything different about what you did at Georgia Tech because of what someone like that said.
Oh, I didn't have any thought in my
I
head.
know, but you know what I mean.
Right.
So I don't know why that needed to be said. He's basically saying, yeah, Brent's been nice and accommodating to me. I would be comfortable going back down there. But he didn't speak up while he was on staff and speak out against Geoff. I mean, is that not really what he's insinuating should have been done? That's absurd to think that that's the expectation of what he should have done. First of all, he would have been fired for that. There would be an argument to fire him for cause, so they wouldn't have to pay whatever was left on his contract as a positions coach. Like, what was that Paul said earlier? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Somehow that doesn't apply if you are defending Paul Johnson while you're currently on the Tech staff. So that kind of disappoints me in Paul, because really, if he's being honest, and I think he is about he wants the best for Georgia Tech, this would be a great opportunity to put Brent over and say, Brent's the guy. Brent's doing a fantastic job there. I'm proud that he's coaching the team. But this is the drawback with Paul Johnson. This is the double-edged sword with him. He's a great coach, but his ego will get in the way sometimes, and it does here. And his ego won't allow him to say this about Brent. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Brent Key guy. I think he's the right guy for the job. When what he's saying, Key said, we need to get back. We don't want to play small ball anymore. That's what the triple option is. He won't address that like that. The triple option requires you to have undersized offensive linemen in comparison to what everyone else runs. Where's the lie in that, Paul? Where's the lie in that? And you know what? We've got one of the best offensive lines in the ACC right now. We had the number one rushing offense in the ACC last year. And we wouldn't be doing that if we had 250s light, but probably 280-pound offensive linemen. I'm sure Mojo, Joe, you'll be watching this, interested to see what you think. And let me know what you guys think in the comments. That to me seemed just inappropriate to say. There was no need to say it. So now we'll go into, he talks about people criticizing the triple option. And a spoiler alert, there's absolutely no problem with the triple option.
Paul Johnson's here, just a few more minutes with him. How tough was it for you to deal with the criticism of the offense? Because you heard it all the time.
You heard it all the time. I got used to it. It was so.
He did not get used to it. He's defensive about it until this day.
There was such a misconception about it, and it, there was a point where I just quit trying to explain it. It was like, everybody thought all you do is dive on the ground and cut block and do that, and that wasn't.
That's a lot of it.
Wasn't it at all? I mean, couldn't have been further from the truth. Now, on the backside, what we call scoop blocked, and they did some of that, but every team in America was doing that then, or not every team, but most of them, and it was because it was different, and because a lot of people didn't like playing it. They tried to describe it and make it seem, and I would be less than truthful if I said that occasionally we had a player in recruiting who didn't want to play in it, but not like they made it out.
Yeah.
I'm calling BS. You're saying occasionally, if what you mean is that they told you to your face they didn't want to play in it, maybe that happened occasionally. But what about all the kids that wouldn't even give you the time of day because of it? I mean, and I know there's a lot of people who want us to go back to the triple option. There are not a lot, but there's like a very vocal minority there. Let me tell you the problems that he will never acknowledge. It is a massive impediment to recruiting when you already have an academic impediment to recruiting, which he talked about right off the bat, not even wanting to take a kid with a 3.2 from Stanford. Jahmyr Gibbs is never coming here a premier running back because they're not a featured back. It's dependent on what the defense does. A kid like Haynes King is never coming here. Zach Pyron's not coming here. You're not signing Philo that we just signed. And by the way, King just had a historic year at Tech. You're not getting any of that if you run the triple option. Now, the trade-off is that you can do more with less because it can be kind of difficult to defend. But you're not going to hear Paul, there's no problem at all with the triple option.
I mean, it was like you also had players who wanted to play in it that you got, like a Justin Thomas.
Sure.
J.R. Revere, who played quarterback for us at Southern. A lot of, I don't know that Josh Nesbitt would agree, but it was tailor-made for Josh Nesbitt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why would Josh Nesbitt not agree? And by the way, in today's college football, you could never transition into the triple option the way he did, because literally every player on your roster offensively would transfer out 2 seconds after you were named head coach.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you could have good receivers on your team even with that offense.
We had great receivers.
We did.
It was like, the NFL guys used to tell us they loved our receivers because they would block. And they weren't just all.
Demaryius Thomas, top 5 wide receiver in the league the entire time he was in there. He's absolutely right about that.
Now, we weren't probably as sophisticated maybe as some people thought in the passing game, but a curl and out's a curl and out. You can call it whatever you want. A fade route's a fade route, and post corner's a post corner, and we threw all those routes. I mean, we had a tree or whatever. We just didn't throw it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And early on with the offense, like when I left Georgia Southern, people don't realize, I think in our 85 national championship game with Tracy, he threw for 440 yards.
Oh, wow.
And
that would be the exception, not the rule, though, I'm sure. So, yeah, look, like I said, I love Paul Johnson. We had tough, well-prepared teams, and we were able to snatch a lot of victories that we probably wouldn't have otherwise gotten. But pretending like there's no issue at all with the triple option is just kind of silly, to be honest. last and look, he can't really press Paul here because Paul, you hear this term access journalism. That's just journalism. All journalism is access journalism. If you push Paul here really on his offense at all, you're never going to get access to him again. He's never going to sit down and do an interview with you again. I get that. I don't blame anyone for that. I do think this is kind of a good question. He goes into his defenses. Like, Paul never really had a great defense, ever. Turns out that's not his issue either, though.
So
That's awesome.
Did you get, and it's probably a bad question, but it was always like the offense was never the problem. It was like the defense.
It was at times. For instance, when after Deshaun Watson's freshman year, which he got hurt in the game we beat him, Clemson absolutely dog-walked us every year after that. So teams that had really athletic, good defenses, especially up front, we did not do well against.
You could never find the right combination to run your defense.
well, what happens was that was another big misnomer that you practiced against the option all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know that I ever had a defensive coordinator that complained against it because you learn how to play the blocks, and it was a toughness thing. Maybe I'll grow. I don't know. But the you know, they're playing, once you start the season, they're playing against a scout team.
Yeah.
All the time. It's not, you know, you might do a 1 minute drill, and we do 1 minute or 2 minute drills against each other, our goal line, but we never lined up and played against each other in the season. And, you know, that was a misnomer. I think that one of the problems you have on defense is we never had a problem on defense at Georgia Southern. We were always top 10 in the country because guess what? We had pretty good players on defense. Mm-hmm. You know, they found out that maybe when you have to play 15 possessions or 18 instead of 12, you still have problems on defense. You know, they've gone through a couple guys at Georgia Tech already.
Well, and I meant the coordinators. I didn't mean because of the practice. You know,
I think what happens is it's hard to get the defensive lineman, and if you don't have the big defensive lineman, it's hard to play defense. And
Sure.
the one thing that we
Boy, we found that out.
were able to do with our offense is we were able to control that a little bit. And, you know, if you're going to play 12 possessions a game versus 19 possessions a game, you might not have to be as good on defense. And we always felt like
Absolutely true. And one of the really the biggest advantage of the triple option, you can just control the clock. You know, he's going to go into it in more detail. But when I hold the ball for 8-9 minutes at a time, man, my defense doesn't have to be quite as in shape.
like if we could get a couple turnovers and 2 stops, we could win. And because you're only going to get the ball 12 times. And you'd put a lot of pressure. You'd hear the other teams talk about when they came into play, you got a lot of pressure on their offense because they know they're not going to get the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, if they go 3 and out, they might not see it again for 8 minutes.
Sure.
All right. So, again, definitely go check out that entire interview. Links in the description of the video. It's fantastic. I guess in summary, a lot of that we knew. I mean, we knew Geoff, you know, was not the biggest fan of Paul. It was surprising to me that he was really shunned. I do think administration, you know, this guy gave 11 years of his life, you know, coaching really good football at Georgia Tech, and that administration would let that happen where he's just shunned, he's not really allowed back, I don't think speaks highly of Georgia Tech administration, and I do think that's something that needs to change. It's funny to hear that coaches are laughing at Geoff. Lord knows all of us watching were laughing at Geoff when we weren't crying about our team losing because of Geoff. But Paul acting like his system had no drawbacks whatsoever and everything's just hunky-dory is equally as silly. I don't know why we couldn't have done something like Auburn did with Cam Newton, which is essentially the triple option out of the shotgun. We did it with Vad Lee for like a year and then never went back to it. But listen to the entire thing. He goes into his time at Georgia Southern, Russell, a lot of good stuff there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know this kind of came off as me being ultra critical of Paul. I didn't really mean for that to happen. Let me say again, I'm a huge fan of Paul Johnson. We won a lot of games under him. I just don't understand why he kind of had to take a shot at Brent, because Brent was honest about the offensive line and he didn't, martyr himself while he was on Jeff's staff. Like, look, dude, he's trying to feed his family like everyone else. If he speaks up, he's going to get fired. Maybe give the guy a pass for that one. But again, let me know what you think in the comments. Appreciate you guys. See you in the next one.